Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the GTX 560 Ti Maximum Graphics Edition GPU. As you can probably tell, this is or was a promotional graphics card from EVGA that launched as part of a $299 Crysis II bundle. Back in 2011, this graphics card would have come with a copy of the game itself, a fold-out Crysis II poster and a t-shirt. The box that the card came in also looked pretty cool. Unfortunately, my card has long since been separated from those included accessories and was shipped to me in an anti-static bag with none of the included goodies. Thanks to my superb editing skills, I have managed to create my own Crysis II t-shirt, which honestly I think looks way better and avoids copyright infringement, I think. Okay, seriously, the 560 Ti was my dream card back in the day, but it was way out of my price range, so I had to settle for my AMD A4 3300 APU with integrated graphics. But fast forward 9 or so years and the 560 Ti can be found at a very cheap used price online, and that can sometimes include this Crysis version if you are lucky enough to find one of these, what I'm sure are now pretty rare examples. So what does it do differently? Well, it has a faster GPU clock speed, a faster memory clock speed, and a higher shader clock than a base model, though it still has just 1GB of GDDR5 VRAM, and in 2020, the difference between this version and any other 560 Ti is probably going to be very marginal. So how does it do in the game that it was actually designed to promote? Well, whether you choose high, very high, extreme or ultra graphical settings, Crysis II will run fine. As a multi-platform title, this wasn't really as much of a PC melter as the first game in the series. After all, it was designed to run on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. For some reason, I couldn't remove the 63 FPS or so cap on PC, despite trying various methods, but it was just nice to see the 560 Ti actually hit this cap with the lower presets almost constantly. Whether we were just taking a walk around the environment and looking at the still impressive visuals or engaging with multiple enemies, things stayed pretty smooth. The extreme graphics setting caused us to take a few performance hits to the mid-40s, but this was still a decent experience with the high resolution textures and DirectX 11 enabled. It was only the Ultra configuration that caused dips to the low 30s, and even so this wasn't an unplayable experience by any means, at least not for me, because I used to own this on the PlayStation 3 and I would constantly see dips below that threshold. Personally, I can't see much of a visual difference between these graphical options, so I'd just play with high or very high with a card like this if it was up to me, which are the two lowest presets that this game offers. There's no low or medium here. Moving on to the original 2007 release of Crysis, and this one is actually playable at the high preset despite what I initially assumed. We were seeing 60 frames per second with motion blur and anti-aliasing disabled. This early level can be pretty intense on hardware as we make our way through the trees, though there are certainly other missions that put far more of a strain on hardware, and not just the 560 Ti. For the most part, performance is acceptable, and turning things down to medium would provide an even better experience, but the game takes a pretty significant graphical hit. It seems then that the Crysis II graphics card can handle Crysis II just fine. The modern remaster will fail to launch though, so yeah, that's not going to happen here. And Crysis 3, while I didn't initially have it installed for the benchmark tests, will run at around 40 FPS at medium. I went back and gave it a brief test, but it was a bit of an afterthought. But will any other games run? New ones, that is. Well, it seems like Mafia Definitive Edition, which released in 2020, always comes to my rescue. Whenever I'm faced with a sea of games that don't quite work on my old hardware, Mafia 2020 always stands out as a little rescue boat on the horizon. Not only did it start on this graphics card, albeit at 720p low settings, but the game actually ran with over 30 frames per second, which was a pretty big surprise. Usually we walk right out onto the street and the frame rate absolutely tanks, but here we were even able to drive right into the city and still maintain this figure. The percentile numbers do still indicate some drops, and this was noticeable, but I'm both surprised and impressed by the average frame rate here. If we switch back to 1080p now, and perhaps I was a bit too lenient looking back on it in GTA 4, but the game ran pretty well with the high textures and everything else set to low. Evidently, this card could have handled much more, as we were getting over 100 FPS even at 1920 by 1080. The game still looks pretty good by modern standards, I think. I think this sort of overall muddy colour combination of the world reflects the storyline in some way, but yeah, the 560 Ti will certainly do a decent job of running it. As you move towards busier city areas in GTA 4, the frame rate will dip a little bit, and it's one of those titles that is generally quite unpredictable when it comes to assessing performance. You can never tell just how well it's going to run on your hardware. Now, the successor to GTA 4, GTA 5 of course, was running smoothly on this card as well, and once again I chose to keep the settings quite low, but I think we could have turned things up a little bit. Now, everything was on low here apart from a couple of options which were set to high, and saying that, I think switching the textures to high as well could have been done, but it does push us over the VRAM limit, and you will see quite a bit of stutter when using those settings. Even driving through the busy city, or what's usually the busy city, doesn't affect things all that much, but then again we have turned the sliders all the way down as well. Still, this isn't bad for an aging 1GB GPU. Just bear in mind that GTA Online is probably going to be a bit of a mess performance-wise. To finalise then, I revisited The Witcher 3, which even at 1920 by 1080 ran fine. Now, we have looked at the 560 Ti in the past, and we also played The Witcher 3, but we were using a different version of the card, and in that video we tried to hit 60 FPS wherever possible. I actually had to use modifications there to make it possible, and if I remember correctly, we made this game look a bit like a cartoon. It certainly helped out, that's for sure. And yeah, it was an interesting experience to say the least. So, the Crysis II 560 Ti. It can handle the game it was designed to play, which is always good, just like the King Kong inspired 7900 GTX we looked at a while back could handle that game. I bring that up because I really like these themed cards. Even though they may not always vary spec-wise, it's always interesting to investigate what accessories and other goodies they originally shipped with back in the day. It also makes me wonder what happened to the original t-shirt and poster, as well as the copy of the game, but maybe the person who sold it to me was the original owner. With all that said then, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at the Crysis II Maximum Edition EVGA 560 Ti. If you did, leave a like on it down below. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully in the next one I may be bringing you the Cyberpunk 2077 minimum specs gaming PC.